Hey, welcome back. So this is the data journalism module, and normally we'd have you in person and you'd have a little bit more homework and we'd cram through some stuff all in person in like a 4 or 5 hour half-day session. What I'm going to do is spread that out. It's going to be the same model you've been following with the in-person modules you're doing over the last few weeks. So what I'm going to do is have a couple of video lectures that show you some techniques building on what we did before. So before you searched for a data set, you found one, you downloaded it, you figured out how to give special parameters to Google so you could isolate data like Excel and CSV kind of files. And then you opened it, you sorted some things. Everybody did a great job, by the way, on the Slack channel, finding things, interpreting them, sorting the data in certain ways, and then reporting back what you found. That's great. Now we're going to take that and build on it. So you know how to find a data set. You know how to do some basic sorting. Now what I'm going to do is build on that and show you in Excel how to do a lot more sorting, how to take 2, 3, even 4 variables and compare them with each other in a really elegant way that's built into Excel. So that's what I want to show you today. So I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to bounce around. So I'll share my whole screen, not just one discrete program. First thing we want to look at is some Excel spreadsheets. I'm going to show you a bunch of different things in Excel, but the first thing I wanted to show you is a couple of you. Justin Kevley had an Excel like this. A couple of people did. Crime data, especially sometimes federal data, comes like this. Lots of complex sorting. There are columns and subcolumns, 2, 3, 4 rows assigned to an area. Each discrete kind of crime has 2 rows, a total, and a ratio. And so it's nice the way they've sorted this for us to tell our own story. You can go down and find your state and look at per 100,000, compare your state to other states. All of that's great. It's nicely organized. It doesn't lend itself well to what I'm going to show you today, which is pivot tables within Excel. So I just wanted to show you, if you get a data set like this, it's not ideal for pivot, because what pivot does is it takes A1 and jumps over to the last column and the last row and imports it into a different kind of data editor that's built in. So this data set doesn't lend itself well to that. I just wanted to show you a data set that does lend itself well to that is the one that Beth Potter found. This is an enormous data set from the MigraHack project, where they looked at lots and lots of cases of data around immigration over the last decade. Data dates from 2009, 2010 until current. It captures the unaccompanied minors wave that came in late in the Obama administration. It captures the huge buildup for housing refugees on the border. It captures the family separation that started under the Trump administration. And the way it captures that is lots and lots of contractors got federal money under different government contracts. So what we're going to do is take a look at that. So here's the raw data set. By the way, it's an enormous data set. You can go over here to the right and scroll. In fact, let me show you a keyboard shortcut. I'm using a Mac, so I can do this. And this data set was acting up a little bit earlier when I was doing that. I'm going to hold Command and hit the down arrow. It should jump to the last case, the last row of data. And it did. It went from row 1 to row 18,234. So there are 18,200 rows of data in this data set. It's an enormous data set. I should be able to hit Command and arrow up and have it jump back to the top. I don't know why it's not working. I'm going to grab the slider over here and just push it back to the top. But now we know this data set is enormous. So the first thing I want to do is kind of sort it. So there are the names of the companies, the cities they're in. Over here to the right, it shows there's a column that has what that company does. So it shows what they do. They provide medical care, housing, bulk equipment. So what I want to do is just sort by this column B, which is how much money was promised by the government to these different contractors. So what I'm going to do is I'll just hit data sort, and I'm going to expand the selection. And what this does is I could sort just column B, but all of a sudden column B wouldn't match everything else I need, the name of the contractor, what they do. So I'll expand the selection. Another way you can do this, by the way, is you can hit the first cell. So in this case, it's A2. I can hold Shift and Command and hit arrow right and arrow down. And that's another way to highlight. You see that it highlights the entire data set. But in this case, because it's so enormous, sometimes you can just expand the selection. I've had data journalists say they don't like expand the selection. So I usually do what I just showed you, which is I pick the first cell, the last cell in the row, and then the last row in the data set, and manually highlight it. But today I'm going to go ahead and hit sort column B, obligated amount, largest to smallest, and we will expand the selection it did automatically. What it's going to do is sort by who got the most money. So the biggest contract was this InGenesis company. It provides healthcare for migrants. One of the things I'm looking for, though, is there's a company called Geo, and Geo Group is right down here in rows 19 and 20. So Geo Group right here has a couple of contracts that are already up about $130 million. They got a lot more contracts than that, and I'm going to show you in a minute. The reason I know that is because Geo Group operates migrant housing facilities all around Texas, all along the border. I think they have facilities in other states too. I know about this because my wife went down and covered them. She was working for Reuters. New York Times reported on it. This is a company that used to be a private prison company, and they now operate migrant facilities on the Texas border and in central Texas. There's a place in Dilley. There are some facilities just outside of San Antonio. They built some pop-up housing facilities, the Geo Group did. They took over a big Walmart that's right on the border in McAllen and operated that as a residential housing center. So they got a bunch of big contracts to do this. So I'm especially curious, especially interested in Geo Group in best data set. So anyway, and this is a classic data set, not like the FBI crime data set I showed you. It's literally just columns and rows, and each column has the same kind of data. This is their ID number, B is how much money they got, E is the name of the company, K is their specialty. They're located in different states, H. So a bunch of great data in here that I can sort with. So that's what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is hit this data set open, insert, pivot table. So at the top of the screen, look for insert and pivot table. And by the way, I'm going to provide the data sets you're going to see me work with here so you can practice this. This is really amazing. Now, pivot tables are intimidating and they can be confusing. You can get lost, and that's the exercises. I'm going to show you some traps and tricks, and then I want you to go play yourself. So I'm going to hit insert pivot table, and what it's going to do is ask, is this the data you want to import? And look carefully at the number here. You'll see the table range. It goes from A1, which is the first cell with the title, to, and remember we looked, 18,234 cases. Column X, case 18,234, that's what we want to import. It automatically captured the entire data set. The reason I like to check what the last row is that so when I go to import, I can glance and go, yes, I know this is the complete data set because I already know how many cases are in this one. I'm going to hit OK. It's going to bring up this odd sort of blank page. So that to the left is this sort of editable field. To the right are all of our variables. And if you look over here, you'll see them. So what I'm really interested in is obligated amount and which company got it. So an easy way to do this is I'm going to grab recipient and I'm going to drag that down to rows. And we're going to work in sort of rows and columns. And then I want obligated amount. So I'm going to click obligated amount and I'm going to drag it down to the box to the bottom right that says values. And what it'll automatically do in Excel, this is really cool. Obligated amount, again, remember, was what the federal contract was. It's going to give me companies and how much money they got. And I can sort this. Now, what it's done is it's taken these companies and it's aggregated them. So I no longer have, let me scroll down here. I should no longer have 18,000 rows of data. I now have 3,200 rows of data. And the reason is there weren't 18,000 companies on contracts. There were about 3,000. Many of them got multiple contracts. You already saw, for example, Geo had 2 contracts right next to each other. They had a number of other contracts spread throughout this data set, throughout the 18,000 rows. So this is normal for this to look like it's smaller. It's not. What it's done is it has taken all of these companies, and you'll see one company. Let me go up and find Geo. Geo should only appear once in this data set now because the Excel spreadsheet in the pivot table has aggregated it. So let me jump down to where Geo is. And I was right, 1237, Geo Group now appears only once on this data set, even though they have multiple contracts. So here's an example. Geo, I know, appears repeatedly in the 18,000 original rows. It only appears once in this data set because it has taken recipients and given each recipient of a contract its own discrete row. And by the way, in recipients, I can click here and look at different things. Now, this isn't really valuable for the names of the companies, but these options are going to be really valuable, this little letter I next to it. So sum of obligation, for example, I'll be able to go in and change some stuff in a minute. First, I want to sort. Now, sorting is a little different in a pivot table. I can try to do all kinds of things with column B. It's just not going to let me. I don't get a sort option here. I don't get a sort option here with data. If I try to sort, it might give me an error because it's going to tell me I'm in a pivot table, and I can't do that. There is an easy way in a pivot table to sort data, but it's different. So this is one of the traps I wanted to show you. I want to sort by obligated amount, but I can't use the old Excel tools to do it. Pivot table has a built-in easy tool to do it. There's one little pull down arrow here at the edge of column A, and I'm going to click on that. It's going to give me a whole bunch of options. So now what I can do is sort by. Column A is recipient. If I click on that, column B is obligated amount. I'm going to hit obligated amount and click descending. What I've done is I'll show you again. I click this little pull down. I changed sort by to the second column, and I'm going to click descending. And it's going to automatically sort together. And look, right at the top with the fattest of federal contracts, $1.5 billion is the GEO group. I suspected they'd be pretty prominent in here because I've seen a number of their housing facilities. They got in articles in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. And here they are with $1.5 billion in federal contracts over the last 10 years to operate what they've operated for decades, which is basically private prisons, except these aren't prisons. They're housing facilities for immigrant families housed in different places around Texas, Arizona, all around the US. That is a lot of money spread across a bunch of contracts. And that's one of the things you can sort out very quickly in a pivot table is GEO group might appear 100 times in those original 18,000 rows of data. Now they're just once and they're all aggregated together. So that's a pretty amazing detail that I'm able to capture just like that. So another thing we can look at is, what else do we have up here? We have year up here. So let me bring down, I don't even need, I'll take recipient away. I'll bring year down here. And these are the different years of amounts that got funded. And so you'll see all these different contracts got funded to that amount. So let's see, looks like 2012 was a very big year, and 2014, $16 billion in federal contracts. By the way, let me do another thing. I can format in here. I can change the format of this column to make it a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on column B, format cells, and this is really useful. Let me go to number, 2 decimal places is fine, but one of the things I can click that's really useful is use 1000 separator. This makes it easier to see if you're dealing with millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, in this case, $1.6 billion in 2012 and 2014. Those are big contracts. Again, that's just kind of by year. Now, let me do something else. I'm going to bring recipient down here again with year. Let me sort them. So recipient is above here. It's kind of a cool way to sort data. Now I'm messing with 3 variables at once in a pivot table. And what I've done is I've put the company up above the word year, and now it shows that company's contracts over the years. So GEO got 146 million in 2010. They got double that, 233 million in 2018. Again, a really quick way to grab multiple variables and sort them in an instant in Excel in a pivot table. This is, again, a really elegant tool. I'm finding out a lot more about GEO Group, which is they got $1.6 billion over multiple contracts over a decade. They are still contracting with the US government. And it looks like their contracts are going up. Look, those contracts were pretty steady, $150 to $200 million year after year. And again, here's the total at the top. It really elegantly sorted this data for me in a really nice way. And what I want you to do is just kind of go play with this stuff. Again, this data set's available. I'm going to put state in rows and then total. So here are the different states. Now, one thing you'll notice, it wasn't just states, it was countries and states. And now what I've done is I've put country above state in my rows box over here to the right, and it changes the data. So sort by obligated amount, descending. So it's still going to do the big dollar amounts by state, and then closer to the bottom, you'll see the different countries mixed in. It has separated out the countries a bit. So now I can look at just the different states, and again, the dollar amounts. So This is crazy. Alaska, $1.1 billion in contracts. I'm not sure what that's about, but obviously there's a news story there. So I'd be really curious about this. $500 million in California, Colorado, over $500 million, Florida, $1.5 billion. So these are tremendous contracts sorted by state. So again, if I'm a local reporter and I'm looking for a peg about immigration, I might go in here and fish and be like, hey, did you know Illinois got $30 million in federal contracts related to immigration over the last decade? What the heck are those for when we're nowhere near a border state? And it might lead you on to an interesting story. New Mexico, fairly small population, fairly small state budget, almost $1 billion in federal contracts, again, around immigration. So there are lots of stories to find and tell in here. This is a bit scandalous. I suspect this is the highest. Anybody want to guess why Virginia had $3 billion in federal contracts related to immigration when it's nowhere near a border? It's because it's the home of the federal government. The capital is in Maryland and Virginia. I guarantee that's why $3 billion in federal contracts went to the state of Virginia rather than Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, which share an enormous 2,000-mile border with Mexico and have real issues with immigration. Even Florida with a lot of migrants coming from the Caribbean. No, $3 billion goes to Virginia. Great stories you can find out just by playing in pivot tables. So let's try another one. I'm going to close this one. We won't say it. By the way, before I bail out of here, if you look at the bottom, clean data is the original data set. So if you want to go back and sort this stuff from the original data set that Beth uploaded, you still can. You can still go back and sort. In fact, it's still sorted from how I had it sorted before with obligated. But at the bottom, you'll see sheet 1. Your pivot table opens a new sheet in that data set. You'll need to save it again to preserve it. You can also name the pivot table. So I can go down here to sheet 1 and right click on it and I can actually give it a rename. So, you can give it a name and then you can save the data set. I'll close this and it'll ask. So I'll go ahead and hit save. So the other thing I want to do is I'm going to open another data set. I got this data from Lourdes. Now, first, let me show you what she shared. In her post, she's got a link to some data, but it's a little bit tricky. So it's actually data on GitHub. It's raw data. Here's what it looks like. So this looks unintelligible, but it's not. This is actually comma separated value shared on GitHub. And this is a really common way to share data through GitHub. You can actually search for data by file type :.csv, and that's what she did. Now there's a way we can salvage this. I'm going to copy all of it. So Command A to highlight, copy, and then I've got a text editor already open. I'm going to paste in a text editor, and here's all that data. And then I'm just going to save it. And what I'm going to do is give it a different extension. So I'm going to call this Lourdes shooting data. This is just that text file that I shared. It's just raw text, and I'm going to rename it. So I will use CSV. Now what I can do is open this. So I'm going to open with, and I'm going to use Microsoft Excel. It may ask me some questions to step through some things, but it looks like it loaded okay. So this is Lourdes's data. This is that CSV data that we saw over here in the window. This was the original data from GitHub, but here's what it looks like in Excel. So again, I put it in a text editor. I saved it as a .csv file. And here we go, we're back in business. We have an Excel spreadsheet. So I can do different things with this too. Let me look at some of these variables. So we'll go to the top, and so we've got location data, details about shooters, ages of shooters. We've got some different things in here, number of total victims. We've got the number of people with and without, including the shooter, if the shooter ended up shooting themselves. So number of people killed, number of people hurt. Horrible telling data, but it's powerful data. So let me do this. Let's go ahead and insert and pivot table. So we're going to hit insert, pivot table. It's going to capture all of the data, 358 rows. I'll hit OK, and we're in a pivot table. What might you want to know about data involving gun violence in the US? Maybe the numbers of shootings by location. So we can do that. We can go up here and put state. So we'll put state in rows, total number of victims. I can bring it down here and it sorts by state. And again, I can click this little pull down and change state to sum and descending, and it's going to give me California, the most shootings. And if you notice, this data actually pretty closely follows population data. So what we're seeing here is California, Texas, Florida, literally the three or among the three of the four most populous states. New York is up here too, high on the list. California, though, clearly gun violence issues, same with Texas. We can interrogate this further by bringing down cities. So I think city is on here. I'll add city to rows, and we can put state above city, sorts it in this really elegant way. So, and one thing I'll point out, Los Angeles, you'd expect as a population center to sort of have perhaps the largest number of shootings in the state, but Stockton, 35 shootings in Stockton, California. Why is that? San Bernardino, 35 shootings there. That's of course linked with a single workplace mass shooting terrorist incident in San Bernardino over the last few years. And so that's what the data shows you. Same in Texas, Austin, large number of shooting victims, even though Houston is more likely to have shooting cases in a typical year. And so a single incident, like a gunman opening fire on the Fort Hood Army base in Killeen, Texas, can dramatically change that number, which is why you see a 71 there in Killeen. So already selecting state and city and total number of victims, we start to see some things emerge. You can do some other things with this data. So another thing is maybe you're curious about gender, and we can go back to the original data and actually sort by this. Gender is over here, and this isn't going to surprise anybody, column S. So let me go sort by column S. What we're going to find is a handful of female shooters and a whole bunch of male shooters, because that's just typical with shooting events. And so another thing they have is age. So age is a great variable for a pivot table. Again, if we glance at the original data, look, people in their teens, where's the shooter age? Look, from teens up to, there's a single shooter, I think, over 50, two over 50. The rest are teens, 20s, 30s, a handful in their 40s. So we can go look at that. And so one of the things you can sort out over here is age. There's a variable over here, shooter ages. I dragged that down to values. Then I clicked the letter I next to count, and I'm going to select average and hit OK. And what it will show you is the average age of the shooters in these different cases. And it'll actually show you that. And it adds decimal places too. And again, I can format this. I can click here, format cells, change decimal places to 2 for a number. Let's see if it accepts that. I'll make it 1 just as a reference. But that tells us the average age of the shooters is very young. Alaska, I suspect, had a single incident by a 16-year-old shooter, which is why their average is 16. But look at the average age of these shooters, 20s, 30s, 1, 2 states, maybe 40, but that's it. So this gives you an idea. The average age of a shooter is very young. They're overwhelmingly male. Some things you already know, but you can go through and sort things out in pivot tables. By the way, one of the variables that already exists is average shooter age is already there, but I just wanted to show you in pivot, we can actually achieve that by clicking I, and you can go through and pick different things. By the way, one other thing I'll show you. We've got shooters. Let me go back, and this might work. Let me insert pivot chart. So I'm going to click insert and pivot chart with the data I have up here. And let me see what it does. It shows me the average age of shooters in these different places. Probably a more elegant one is like total number of victims sorted. So let me do that one. I'm going to delete this pivot chart. Let me take this away, and we'll put, let's see, total number of victims I'm going to put down in values with state. I'm going to sort that by clicking the little pull down next to row tables. So I will change that from state to sum and descending. So now I've got my data sorted. California, 348 killings, down to 3 victims in Maine. And I'm going to click insert pivot chart, and it's going to automatically make me a little table here that captures that data in a visual way. There's a little interactivity in here that goes with it. So one of the things I could do is I can highlight this and copy it. I could stick it in a Word doc, and it would capture this visually, or I could actually paste this into my web page or my WordPress site or on a social media page, and it will retain the interactivity. Here's one more, and I'll share this data set with you too. I have data on Major League Baseball salaries. So this is every player in the major leagues and their salary. This is great data for a pivot table. So the first thing I'll do is, before I go into a pivot table, let me sort this data. And I don't know what you're curious about. I'm curious about who's the highest paid player in Major League Baseball. This data is a couple years old now, but we're going to go sort, not name. We're going to sort by salary, largest to smallest. You've done this a few times. And Mike Trout, LA Angels, makes a little bit more than Clayton Kershaw with the Dodgers just across town. They're both $34 million men. By the way, these are annual salaries for the year the data was collected. I'm not a huge baseball fan, but this is interesting data to sort because there are all kinds of sub-variables in here. Team, what position do they play, that we can interrogate. So it's great for a pivot table. So I'm going to have this Major League Baseball data, insert, pivot table. It's going to tell me there are 878 cases. Perfect. I'd already checked, so I knew. And here we go. So let's do this. Let's do team and then salary. And this is actually kind of funny because, and I think I can sort this again. So let me sort by sum of salary descending. Pretty sure the Giants, yeah, San Francisco Giants. Oh, wait, I'm going to format this column again. Format cells, and then click number and put in use 1000 separator. And the reason I'm doing that is now it's easier to see. We're talking about $221 million. My Cincinnati Reds pay less than half that, and the lowly Oakland A's pay $62 million, between 1/3 and 1/4 what the San Francisco Giants play in payroll for their whole team. So instantly we get some useful data, which is my home team. And again, Oakland, right across the bay from the San Francisco Giants, lowest salary in the major leagues, and right across the San Francisco Giants, by far the highest salary up here, which is kind of remarkable. So let's look at some other stuff. What about position? So we've got team. We can bring position down here under team, and it will add all those positions. So first base, 17,200,000. Now, let me point something out. This is all first basemen. There may be more on a team. That's the salary. So what I can do is take sum of salary, click on that little arrow, that little letter I next to sum, and put in average, and it changes these salaries to average. So this is the average pay of a third baseman or a catcher on a team. And what you start to notice is pitchers, RP is relief pitcher, SP is starting pitcher. Starting pitchers make a lot of money. Anyway, for any of these data sets that have lots of variables. So again, Major League Baseball is a simple one, but think about Lourdes's data. Lots of details on state, city, number of shooting, age, gender, number of victims. We had all kinds of data there we could interrogate. The same thing with Beth Potter's data that she found about immigration. Lots of different details you can look at. So state, city, all these different agencies, the size of the contracts. You could even go in and sort some different details like what years or how many years did they get contracts. All of that is much more easily interrogatable using pivot tables. And again, I can take the pivot table. I'll go back, let me simplify this one. I'm gonna take out position, we'll have team and average salary, and this is gonna make an embarrassing, let me sort it. So I'm gonna sort average salary descending. We'll get the Giants back up top. This makes a nice, elegant pivot chart. And you'll see this nice descending lines of teams that sort of capture average salary of players on these different teams. San Francisco Giants average player makes $7 million. Now the reason is Mike Trout, some of these other players, Trout's not with them, but they've got players on that team that make $30 or $28 million, and it upsets the average. But again, a really nice, elegant little pivot chart that you can get out of your pivot table with data like this. So what I want you to do is I've provided these data sets. You can use my data sets. There are 3 in there. You can go search for your own. You can use the data you suggested already earlier on the Slack channel. However you want to do it, go find some data or use mine. Go into pivot tables, get lost, experiment. If you have to, back this up and repeat parts of it, and go see what you can find out. I just want you to get comfortable in pivot tables because they're a great tool to teach your students when they're working in data journalism.